I always thought my house had 3 bedrooms. That's what the listing said when I bought it, and that's exactly what I saw when I moved in. 3 doors, 3 rooms, nothing unusual. It was an old house, built in the early 1900s, and I loved its charm. The creaky wooden floors, the antique glass doorknobs, the high ceilings with ornate molding. Felt like a place with history, but I never expected that history to be something I would have to confront. It all started when I decided to renovate. I wanted to knock down a wall in my bedroom to expand the closet. The house had come with a stack of old blueprints, yellowed with age, and I pulled them out to get a sense of the original structure. That's when I noticed something strange. The floor plan showed 4 bedrooms, but my house only had 3. I stared at the blueprint for a long time trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Maybe a previous owner had remodeled and removed a room. But when I looked at the measurements, everything lined up. There was an empty space between my bedroom and the guest room that didn't seem to exist in real life. My heart pounded as I walked over to the wall in question. I knocked. Hollow. That wasn't normal. The other walls gave a solid, dull thud when I knocked, but this one sounded empty. My stomach twisted with unease. I knocked again, harder this time, and listened. Silence. But not just silence. A heavy, unnatural stillness, like the air inside that space hadn't moved in years. I should have left it alone, but I didn't. Grabbing a hammer, I hesitated for only a second before swinging. The first hit cracked through the plaster easily, sending dust billowing into the air. I coughed and waved it away, peering into the hole. Darkness. A void where there should have been solid wall. My heart pounded. I widened the hole, tearing at the drywall with my hands, until suddenly, I found it. A hidden doorway. The frame was old, the wood warped and splintered, but there was no door, just an opening leading into a pitch-black room. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted my phone and turned on the flashlight. Inside was a nursery, an old, forgotten nursery. The walls were painted a faded pastel blue, peeling in places, with cartoon animal decals half scratched away by time. A small wooden crib sat in the corner, its mattress sagging and stained. A rocking chair faced the wall, its wooden runners coated in dust. Shelves lined one side of the room, filled with old toys, wooden blocks, a stuffed rabbit with button eyes, a rusted tin soldier. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, untouched for decades. And then my flashlight landed on the bed against the far wall. Someone was lying there. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was small, still, covered in dust. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. My shaking hand raised the light higher, illuminating the face. A child. Or what had once been a child. Its eyes were closed, its skin shrunken and gray, stretched tight over its small skull. Wisps of brittle hair clung to its scalp. Its hands were folded neatly over its chest, clutching something. A small, crumbling teddy bear. My stomach lurched. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I stumbled back, my foot hitting something on the floor. A small wooden box. There was a name carved into it. Eleanor. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside were old papers brittle with age. A birth certificate. Eleanor Jameson, born 1923. A death certificate. Eleanor Jameson, died 1928. But if Eleanor had died in 1928, why was she still here? Why was she behind a hidden wall, in a sealed room? My flashlight flickered. The air grew colder. Then, from behind me, the rocking chair creaked. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get out of that room and never look back. But I couldn't move. The sound of the rocking chair creaking echoed through the still air, slow and rhythmic, like someone gently pushing off the floor. My breath caught in my throat. The flashlight flickered again. And then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, delicate, like a child's voice drifting through the dust-filled air. You found me. A sharp, icy terror shot through my veins. My fingers clenched around the wooden box as if it could anchor me to reality. Slowly, against every screaming nerve in my body, I turned toward the chair. It was moving, Not violently, not with force, just rocking. A slow, steady back and forth. The wooden floor beneath it groaned with each motion. But the chair was empty. I took a shaky step backward, my foot crunching against broken drywall. The flashlight beam trembled as I swept it around the room, looking for something, anything, to explain what was happening. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed for the first time in decades. And then, the bed was empty. I stopped breathing. The figure that had been lying there, the small, dust-covered corpse. I had seen it, I knew I had seen it. But the sheets were now smooth, undisturbed, as if nothing had ever been there at all. A cold, suffocating dread settled in my chest. I wasn't alone in this room. Please don't leave me. The voice was right behind me. I spun around, and the flashlight flickered violently, casting erratic shadows across the walls. For a split second, I saw something in the periphery of my vision. A small figure, barely more than a shape, standing in the farthest corner of the room. A child. But as soon as the light hit it, it was gone. The air in the room thickened, pressing in on me like a physical weight. The rocking chair had stopped moving. The only sound was the ragged hitch of my own breath. I had to get out. I stumbled backward through the hole in the wall, nearly tripping over the debris. My shaking hands clawed at the doorway as I hauled myself into my bedroom, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. I turned to look one last time, and the doorway was gone. I gasped. My hands pressed against solid drywall. No opening, no hole, no hidden room, just a smooth, unbroken wall. The nursery had disappeared. I staggered back, my head spinning, my body cold with shock. I scrambled for my phone, fingers fumbling as I tried to pull up the photos I had taken. There had to be proof, something, anything to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But there was nothing. No pictures of the room. No pictures of the crib, the toys, the rocking chair. The photos I had taken were still in my gallery, but they were just blank. Black screens, as if the camera had captured nothing at all. I stood there in the dark, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My mind reeled, trying to piece together what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Had I hallucinated the entire thing? Then, my phone buzzed in my hand. A notification. A single, unread message. No sender. No number. Just 2 words. Found you. I dropped my phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud, the screen casting an eerie glow across the room. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared at the message. Found you. I didn't want to pick the phone up. I didn't want to move at all. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, pressing against me like something unseen was watching, waiting. My body screamed at me to run, to get out of the house, to never come back. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without understanding what had just happened. With trembling fingers, I bent down and grabbed my phone. The message was still there, staring back at me. I hesitated, then typed out a single word. Who? I hit send. The moment I did, the screen flickered. The phone went dark for a split second, then came back to life. Another message appeared. Eleanor. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped away from the wall, my mind racing. I had just seen her name, on the wooden box on the birth and death certificates. Eleanor Jameson. A little girl who had supposedly died in 1928. But she hadn't been buried. She had been sealed away, forgotten, hidden. And now she had found me. A loud thud echoed from inside the wall. I jumped back, nearly dropping my phone again. Another thud, harder this time. Then another. Like someone was slamming against the other side of the drywall, trying to get out. I turned and bolted. I ran down the hallway, past the darkened windows, past the old wooden staircase, into the living room. My hands fumbled with the front door lock, but before I could turn the knob, creak, the floor behind me groaned. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, soft, deliberate footsteps creeping closer. But I couldn't turn around. I wouldn't turn around. A whisper brushed against my ear. Don't go. I shot through my veins. I ripped the door open and stumbled outside, gasping for air. The cold night air hit my face, But I didn't stop running. I didn't stop until I reached my car, throwing myself inside and locking the doors. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. My breaths came in short, shallow gasps. From the porch, the house loomed in silence. The windows were dark. The door stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for me to come back inside. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Then, upstairs, in the window of my bedroom, something moved. A small, shadowy figure, standing completely still, watching me. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away, gravel spraying beneath my tires. I didn't stop driving until I reached a motel 10 miles away. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen what I knew I had seen, that I wasn't being watched, that I hadn't just let something out. I didn't go back to the house the next day, or the day after that. I called a real estate agent, put it back on the market, and took a loss just to get rid of it. I never told the buyers what I had found. Maybe I should have. Maybe it was wrong to leave them with that house, with her. But I was too afraid to go back. Too afraid to knock on the wall and hear someone knock back. Too afraid to hear that whisper again. Found you. When I bought the house, I knew it needed some work. It had been built in the 1950s, and while the structure was solid, it had been sitting vacant for years. The real estate agent told me the previous owners had left in the late 90s and never returned. No one in the neighborhood seemed to know why. That didn't bother me. I got the house for cheap, and all I saw was potential. For the first few weeks, I focused on repairs. Fixing leaky faucets, patching cracks in the walls, replacing old light fixtures. Nothing unusual happened. But then I found the walkie-talkie. It was in the basement, buried under a pile of dust-covered newspapers and rusted tools. It looked like a child's toy, bright red plastic, a stubby little antenna, and a single button on the side. I turned it over in my hands, surprised by how clean it was compared to the other junk in the box. The battery compartment was empty, but something about it unsettled me. That night, after dinner, I popped in some fresh batteries and switched it on. A soft crackle of static filled the speaker. I grinned, it still worked. I pressed the button and spoke. Hello? Can anyone hear me? Silence. Then, yes, I'm still here. I froze. The voice was soft, childlike, barely more than a whisper. I hadn't expected a response, let alone one so immediate. My first thought was that the device had picked up a radio frequency from a neighbor. Maybe a kid playing with another walkie-talkie somewhere nearby. I pressed the button again. Who is this? A pause. Then, even softer. I live here. A chill crept down my spine. I glanced around the dimly lit kitchen, suddenly hyper-aware of the silence in the house. I forced a chuckle, trying to shake the unease. Yeah? Well, I live here now. Silence. Then, I know. A shiver ran through me. I set the walkie-talkie down on the counter, my fingers suddenly cold. I didn't like the way the voice had said that. It wasn't playful. It wasn't even surprised. It was just knowing. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The voice, the way it had sounded. Not distant, not like it was coming through a weak signal. It had been close. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself it was just a kid on the other end. But then, at 2:13 a.m., I woke up. The walkie-talkie was on. I knew I had turned it off. I was sure of it. But there it was, glowing faintly in the darkness on my nightstand. And then, "Are you awake?" My stomach dropped. The voice wasn't coming from the walkie-talkie anymore. It was coming from right beside my bed. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The voice had been right next to me. Not through the walkie-talkie. Not crackling with static. But clear. Close. I turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The room was dark. Too dark. My eyes strained to adjust, searching for movement in the shadows. The only light came from the dim glow of the walkie-talkie on my nightstand, casting a faint red hue across the room. Nothing was there, but I felt it. Presence. A weight in the air, thick and suffocating. My entire body was tense, every muscle frozen in place, like a rabbit caught in a predator's gaze. Then, crrrrk. The walkie-talkie let out a burst of static. And the voice whispered again. Come downstairs. My mouth went dry. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up, to shake off the nightmare that I knew wasn't a nightmare. The floor creaked. My breath caught in my throat. That wasn't the house settling. That wasn't my imagination. That was footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I sat up too fast, my vision swimming with dizziness. The door was slightly open, just a sliver, and beyond it, nothing but pitch-black darkness. But I heard it, the faint sound of bare feet against the wooden floorboards. Something was in the house. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the open doorway. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I stayed frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs. The air was thick, heavy, pressing in from all sides. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to move at all. But then, the walkie-talkie crackled again. Why won't you come downstairs? I couldn't take it anymore. I lunged forward, grabbed the walkie-talkie, and turned it off, my hands slick with sweat. My breaths came in short, panicked gasps. Silence. For a long time, I sat there, gripping the device, waiting, listening. But nothing happened. No more footsteps. No more voices. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. I don't know how long I sat there before exhaustion took over. At some point, my body just shut down, and I drifted into a restless, uneasy sleep. I woke up at sunrise, my body aching, my mind foggy. For a moment, everything felt normal. The fear from the night before seemed distant, like something that had happened years ago instead of hours. Then I looked down. The walkie-talkie was back on. And in my other hand, a second walkie-talkie. I had never seen it before. It was identical to the first, and it was covered in dust, like it had been sitting somewhere untouched for decades. I stared at it, my stomach twisting into knots. My mind raced for an explanation, but I came up empty. There was no reason, no possible way this could be here. Then, before I could even react, the speaker crackled one last time. I told you I live here. I dropped the second walkie-talkie like it burned me. It hit the floor with a dull thud, sending a small puff of dust into the air. My skin prickled with cold dread as I stared at it, my mind scrambling for an explanation. This wasn't possible. I had only found one walkie-talkie in the basement. I had never seen this second one before. So how? A burst of static crackled through the first walkie-talkie, still sitting on my nightstand. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly reached for it with a trembling hand. You dropped mine. My fingers recoiled before they could touch it. The voice was different this time. No longer a whisper. No longer distant. It was right next to me. I scrambled out of bed so fast I nearly tripped. My phone's flashlight flickered as I shined it across the room, searching for movement. The morning light had barely begun to creep through the windows, casting long shadows across the walls. Everything looked normal, but I felt it. I wasn't alone. Something was watching me. I backed toward the door, heart hammering against my ribs. The house was silent, too silent. No birds outside. No distant hum of cars. Just that thick, suffocating stillness pressing against my skin. I needed to get out. I grabbed my keys and phone and bolted down the hallway. Every step sent sharp creaks through the old wooden floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. When I reached the front door, my hands fumbled with the lock, slick with sweat. Then, crrrrk. The static returned. And from the walkie-talkie still lying on my bedroom floor, the voice whispered, "Don't go." I yanked the door open and ran. I didn't stop driving until I reached a diner on the outskirts of town. My hands were still shaking as I ordered coffee, barely able to form words. The waitress gave me a concerned look but didn't ask questions. I didn't have answers anyway. I sat there for hours watching people come and go, trying to convince myself that what had happened wasn't real. Maybe I had been half asleep. Maybe the house was getting to me, but no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brought something with me. My phone buzzed. A text. No number. No contact name. Just 2 words. Come back. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. My mouth went dry. I turned my phone off and tossed it onto the table, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I wasn't going back. Couldn't. I called a real estate agent that afternoon and told them I wanted the house gone. I didn't care about the price. I didn't care how long it took. I just wanted out. That night I checked into a motel. I double-locked the door. I shoved a chair against it. I kept every light on. But when I finally lay down, exhausted, my head pounding, I saw something on the nightstand. A bright red walkie-talkie, covered in dust, crackled to life. And in the darkness, the voice whispered, "You can't leave. You took me with you." It started with the voices. At first, they were faint, muffled whispers drifting through the walls at night. I thought maybe it was the pipes or the old wooden frame settling. The house was built in the 1940s and I had just moved in, so I brushed it off as something I'd get used to. But the whispers didn't stop. They got louder. Some nights I could almost make out words. Not full conversations, just fragments, soft, breathy murmurs that seemed to come from inside the walls. I checked outside more than once, thinking maybe a neighbor was playing music or talking late at night. But my nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile away, and I lived in a single-family home. There was no one on the other side of my walls. At least, there shouldn't have been. One night, I pressed my ear against the drywall, trying to pinpoint the source. The whispers stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so thick it made my skin crawl. Then, a slow, raspy breath. Not mine. Right on the other side of the wall. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mind raced for an explanation. Anything that would make sense. Maybe an animal had gotten into the walls? A raccoon? A rat? But I knew that wasn't right. Because rodents don't whisper. And they definitely don't breathe like that. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every shift in the house sent my nerves into overdrive. But the whispers didn't return. The breathing didn't come back. By morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Sleep deprivation, maybe. Stress from the move. Until I saw the vent. A small air vent near the base of the wall, just a few inches wide. I had never paid much attention to it before, but now something about it felt wrong. The metal slats were bent slightly outward, as if something had been pushing against them, or watching through them. A shiver crawled down my spine. I knelt down, hesitated, then leaned in. The vent was dark, leading into the narrow space between the walls. I listened. Silence. Then, a whisper, right in my ear. "I see you." I jerked back so fast I fell onto the floor, my breath coming in sharp gasps. My vision swam with panic. I scrambled away from the vent, every hair on my body standing on end. I wasn't alone in this house. Someone or something was in the walls, and it knew I was listening. I didn't move. Couldn't. My back was pressed against the far wall, my breath shallow, my hands shaking as I stared at the vent. The whisper had been right there, so close I should have felt it against my skin. But the vent was empty. Just a dark, narrow gap leading into the unseen spaces of my home. A space I now knew was occupied. I forced myself to stand, my legs weak beneath me. My first instinct was to get the hell out. Leave the house. Call someone. But what would I even say? That I thought someone was in my walls? That I heard a voice? No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. I needed proof. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and aimed it toward the vent. The metal slats were warped, slightly pried open, as if something had been pressing its weight against them. The thought made my stomach churn. I took a step closer. Slowly, carefully, I knelt and lifted the vent cover off the wall. A rush of stale, cold air hit my face. The opening was small, too small for a person to fit through. But I felt it again. That presence. Like something was watching me from the darkness beyond. I lifted my phone, angling the light into the void. At first, all I saw was dust, cobwebs clinging to old wooden beams, tiny specks floating in the air. But then, at the very edge of the light, something moved, a shifting shadow, a hand, small, thin fingers curling around a wooden beam. I dropped the vent cover and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cold night air. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The house loomed behind me, silent and still, but I knew I wasn't alone in there. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I pulled up the camera. I hadn't been recording, but maybe the last frame was still there. I opened the photo gallery. There was an image, blurry, grainy from the motion, but in the corner of the frame just before I had dropped the vent, a face, pale, hollow eyes, thin lips stretched into a jagged, impossible grin. Watching me, I nearly threw my phone. My stomach twisted, my entire body screaming at me to go, go, go. But then, from inside the house, a soft, rhythmic knocking began. Not at the door, not at a window, from inside the walls. And between each knock, a voice whispered, "Let me out." I stood frozen in the driveway, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The knocking continued, slow, deliberate, echoing from inside the walls. Let me out. I wanted to run. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to leave, to drive as far away as possible and never look back. But something held me there, a sick, morbid curiosity. I had to know what was in my walls. Clenching my jaw, I forced myself to move. I stepped toward the front door, each footstep feeling heavier than the last. The knocking stopped. The house stood silent, as if it had been expecting me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with something unseen. The house felt wrong, like the walls were breathing, like they were listening. My phone was still clutched in my hand, and I hovered my thumb over the call button, ready to dial 911. But what would I even say? I followed the silence, moving cautiously down the hallway. I reached the vent where I had seen the face. The cover lay on the floor, right where I had dropped it. The opening gaped like a mouth, dark and yawning. I shined my flashlight inside. Empty. Just wooden beams, wires, dust. No movement. No hands. No faces. Had I imagined it? Had my mind twisted the shadows into something else? Then I saw it. Deep inside, tucked into a narrow gap between the studs, was a piece of cloth. Faded, old, torn at the edges. I hesitated, then reached in, my fingers brushing against the fabric. I pulled it out slowly. It was a child's nightgown, tiny, yellowed with age, and covered in dried handprints. I dropped it and staggered backward, my stomach twisting in horror. The knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent, coming from multiple places at once, behind me, above me, beneath my feet. The whispers followed, overlapping, urgent. Let me out. He's still here. He's watching you. The walls groaned. A deep, unnatural sound, like wood bending under an impossible weight. Then, a long, rasping breath came from the vent, right in front of my face. I didn't think. I turned and ran. I flew out the front door, down the steps, into my car. My hands fumbled with the keys as I shoved them into the ignition, my entire body trembling. In the rearview mirror, the house stood silent, its dark windows staring back at me. Then, as I watched, something moved behind the glass. A shape, tall, thin, smiling. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away, gravel spraying beneath my tires. I never went back. I left everything behind. Furniture, clothes, the house itself. I didn't care. A few months later, I worked up the nerve to do some research. I found an old newspaper article. 1953. A family had lived there, a couple and their young daughter. She had gone missing. The parents insisted someone had taken her, that she had been inside the walls, that something had kept her there. But no one believed them. Eventually, the couple was committed. The girl was never found. But I know the truth now. She never left. She's still there. And so is the thing that put her there. Waiting. listening, knocking. I stood frozen in the driveway, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The knocking continued, slow, deliberate, echoing from inside the walls. Let me out. I wanted to run. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to leave, to drive as far away as possible and never look back. But something held me there, a sick, morbid curiosity. I had to know what was in my walls. Clenching my jaw, I forced myself to move. I stepped toward the front door, each footstep feeling heavier than the last. The knocking stopped. The house stood silent, as if it had been expecting me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with something unseen. The house felt wrong, like the walls were breathing, like they were listening. My phone was still clutched in my hand, and I hovered my thumb over the call button, ready to dial 911. But what would I even say? I followed the silence, moving cautiously down the hallway. I reached the vent where I had seen the face. The cover lay on the floor, right where I had dropped it. The opening gaped like a mouth, dark and yawning. I shined my flashlight inside. Empty. Just wooden beams, wires, dust. No movement. No hands. No faces. Had I imagined it? Had my mind twisted the shadows into something else? Then I saw it. Deep inside, tucked into a narrow gap between the studs, was a piece of cloth. Faded, old, torn at the edges. I hesitated, then reached in, my fingers brushing against the fabric. I pulled it out slowly. It was a child's nightgown, tiny, yellowed with age, and covered in dried handprints. I dropped it and staggered backward, my stomach twisting in horror. The knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent, coming from multiple places at once, behind me, above me, beneath my feet. The whispers followed, overlapping, urgent. Let me out. He's still here. He's watching you. The walls groaned. A deep, unnatural sound, like wood bending under an impossible weight. Then, a long, rasping breath came from the vent, right in front of my face. I didn't think. I turned and ran. I flew out the front door, down the steps, into my car. My hands fumbled with the keys as I shoved them into the ignition, my entire body trembling. In the rearview mirror, the house stood silent, its dark windows staring back at me. Then, as I watched, something moved behind the glass. A shape, tall, thin, smiling. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away, gravel spraying beneath my tires. I never went back. I left everything behind. Furniture, clothes, the house itself. I didn't care. A few months later, I worked up the nerve to do some research. I found an old newspaper article. 1953. A family had lived there, a couple and their young daughter. She had gone missing. The parents insisted someone had taken her, that she had been inside the walls, that something had kept her there. But no one believed them. Eventually, the couple was committed. The girl was never found. But I know the truth now. She never left. She's still there. And so is the thing that put her there. Waiting, listening, knocking. I hadn't been back to my childhood home in 20 years. Life had pulled me away, college, work, relationships. But when my mother passed, the house became mine, and I had no choice but to return. I had planned to sell it immediately, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe guilt. Maybe it was just the strange feeling I got as I stood in the overgrown driveway, staring up at the empty windows. It looked exactly the same. Time hadn't touched it, like it had been frozen the moment we left. The same cracked white paint, the same sagging porch steps. The curtains in my old bedroom were still drawn the way I remembered, like the house had been waiting for me. I stepped inside, greeted by the thick, stale scent of dust and wood rot. The air was heavy, unmoving, as if nothing had disturbed it for decades. My footsteps echoed in the silence. The furniture was gone, but small details remained. The dent in the floor where my father's chair used to sit. The faint pencil marks on the doorframe where my height had been measured year after year. And then I saw the calendar. It was still hanging on the kitchen wall. The same one my mother had used for years, with her careful handwriting marking birthdays, doctor's appointments, reminders to buy groceries. The pages were yellowed, brittle with age. But the strangest thing, the date hadn't changed. It was still set to the last day we had lived here. August 17th, 2003. I felt a chill creep up my spine. That wasn't possible. Someone must have changed it at some point. Maybe my mother, if she had visited after we moved. Maybe the wind had knocked the pages forward and someone had just reset them. I tried to ignore it. That night, I slept in my old room. The bed creaked beneath me, the air thick with the scent of dust and forgotten memories. I barely slept, listening to the silence of the house. And then, sometime in the early hours, I woke up. The hallway light was on. I was sure I had turned it off before going to bed. The dim glow stretched under my door, casting a faint yellow line across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest. Something felt wrong. Slowly, I pushed back the covers and stood. My feet barely made a sound on the old wooden floor. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then pulled the door open. The hallway was empty, but the light was on. And the calendar, the page had flipped. August 18th, 2023. Tomorrow. I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. My hands were ice cold. The paper hadn't been disturbed when I arrived. The house had been untouched. No one else was here. So who changed the date? The air around me seemed to tighten, pressing against my skin. I felt a presence, something unseen, something watching. The light in the hallway flickered. And behind me, from the darkness of my old bedroom, I heard the closet door creak open. I turned slowly. The closet door stood open, its darkness yawning into my bedroom like a gaping mouth. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even touched it. The air inside was thick, unmoving, like the breath of something lurking just beyond sight. A wave of childhood fear rushed over me, memories surfacing. Nights spent staring at that same closet as a kid, knowing something was inside but never daring to look. I swallowed hard. I wasn't a child anymore. With my phone flashlight trembling in my grip, I stepped forward. The floor groaned beneath my weight. I raised the light, shining it into the closet's depths. First, there was nothing. Just dust, empty shelves, and the faint outline of where my old clothes had once hung. Then, at the very back, something shifted. My stomach twisted. The shadows seemed to bend, pulling away, revealing something I hadn't noticed before. A hole. No, a doorway. A narrow, rectangular opening cut into the back of the closet, leading into somewhere else. I staggered back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This hadn't been here when I was a kid. I would have remembered, wouldn't I? The hallway light flickered again. Then, from inside the dark opening, a whisper. Not words, not even a voice, just a sound, soft and rasping, like dry lungs trying to pull in air. Something was in there, and it was waiting. I turned and ran. I didn't sleep. I locked my bedroom door, shoved a chair in front of it, and sat on the bed with my back against the wall, watching the door for any sign of movement. Every so often, I swore I heard faint scraping from the closet, like nails dragging along wood. The calendar sat in the kitchen, untouched, still set to tomorrow. By morning, I had made my decision. I was leaving. I grabbed my bags, yanked open the front door, and froze. The porch was different. The paint wasn't peeling. The boards weren't warped. The front lawn wasn't overgrown. It was clean, perfect, like it had been 20 years ago. My breath hitched. I turned, heart hammering, and looked back into the house. The furniture was back. The faded wallpaper was new. A voice called from the kitchen. "Breakfast is ready, sweetheart." I knew that voice. I turned toward the sound, and my mother stepped out from behind the counter. But she was still the same age she had been in 2003. Her smile was warm, wrong. My stomach clenched. My mother was dead. I had buried her last month. She tilted her head. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice light, gentle, like we had never left, like I had never grown up, like the house had pulled me back. I staggered away. My legs felt numb, my vision swimming. I ran for the door, But outside, where my car should have been, where the driveway should have stretched into the street, there was nothing. Just endless trees. No road. No signs. No way out. Behind me, my mother's voice softened. Almost amused. "You just got home, honey. Where would you go?" The hallway light flickered. The calendar flipped again. August 19th. The day after tomorrow. And I suddenly knew. I wouldn't be here to see it. It started with something small. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I heard my smart speaker activate in the other room. The soft chime echoed through the quiet house, followed by the robotic voice. "I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat?" I frowned. I hadn't said anything. I spit out the toothpaste and stepped into the living room. The speaker's light was glowing softly, waiting for input. I hesitated, then muttered, "Cancel." The light blinked off. Weird. I went to bed, thinking maybe it had picked up some sound from outside. Then, the next night, it happened again. I was just dozing off when I heard the chime. "Are you home?" I sat up fast, my pulse spiking. I grabbed my phone and opened the smart speaker app to check the voice history. Maybe I had accidentally activated it somehow. There was a log. The last recorded command had been from earlier that morning. Someone had said, "I'm leaving, but I'll be right back." I hadn't said that. I was alone in the house. My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen. My hands felt suddenly cold. Someone or something had spoken to my speaker, and now it wanted to know if I was home. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I'm leaving, but I'll be right back." Someone had said those words into my smart speaker. But I hadn't, and no one else had been in my house all day. A chill crept up my spine. Maybe it was a glitch, I told myself. Maybe the microphone had picked up something from the TV, or a neighbor's voice from outside. But that didn't explain why it had activated again tonight. Why it had asked, "Are you home?" I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe. Maybe I was overreacting. I clicked on the voice recording in the app. A second later, the playback started. The audio was distorted, staticky, but the words were clear. "I'm leaving, but I'll be right back." It was my voice. Every hair on my body stood on end. I never said that. The recording ended, leaving me in silence. My hands felt numb as I clutched the phone. It wasn't just a glitch. Something had mimicked my voice. I turned off the speaker completely, unplugged it. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. The house suddenly felt too still, too quiet, like something was listening. That night I barely slept. Every little creak of the house sent my nerves into overdrive. But nothing happened. By morning, I almost convinced myself it had been my imagination. Maybe the speaker had just glitched, recycled an old recording, something technical I didn't understand. But then, as I got ready for work, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The front door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it the night before. I checked it twice. The air in the house felt heavier than before, like the walls were holding their breath. I hesitated, staring at the door, my hand hovering over the knob. Had someone been in my house last night? I checked every room, every closet. Nothing was out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then my phone buzzed. A notification from my smart speaker app. New voice command received. My breath caught in my throat. That wasn't possible. I had unplugged the speaker. Hands shaking, I opened the app and played the recording. The audio was faint, crackling with static. Then, a voice. My voice. "I'm back." I left the house that day, took my laptop and a bag and checked into a motel across town. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling ridiculous. Running from my own house because of a stupid smart speaker? I tried to convince myself it was just a glitch, a weird software bug. Maybe it had recorded me saying something similar before, and now it was just recycling the audio in some freak error. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. It had mimicked me, and worse, it had known I had left. The next morning, I got a call from my neighbor. "Hey," she said, "are you having a party or something?" I frowned. "What? No, I'm not home." There was a pause. Then, well, someone's in your house. I saw the lights on last night. And this morning, I heard talking. A wave of nausea hit me. Did you see anyone? I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. No, but I swear I heard you. I was outside letting the dog out, and I heard your voice through the window. My skin went cold. You're sure? I whispered. Yeah. It sounded like you were talking to someone. I felt like I couldn't breathe. There was no one in my house. And yet my neighbor had heard me. I hung up without another word. I didn't go back. I called the police instead. Told them someone had broken into my house. They checked it out, found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anything unusual. But when they asked if I wanted to file a report, I hesitated. Because what could I even say? Someone's in my house, but they sound like me? My smart speaker is talking to me, and it knows when I leave? I told them I'd handle it and left it at that. That night, I got one last notification from my smart speaker. Voice command received. I didn't play it. I didn't want to hear what it said. I packed my things and never went back. I sold the house as fast as I could. Never told the buyers what had happened. But sometimes, late at night, when my phone buzzes with an unexpected notification, I wonder, did it follow me? Did it learn my voice so well that it doesn't need the speaker anymore? And if I ever pick up the phone in the dead of night, will I hear myself whisper, "I'm back"?